Okay, I think looks like we've got everyone in their seats. I'm Jamie Fly. I'm a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute in Washington, and you might see from my bio here, I'm listed as a resident of the USA as well as Czechia, which is not entirely accurate, but I did live here in Prague for 4 years, up until 2023, and so a longtime friend of the colleagues at Forum 2000. So excited to be back with you to discuss China. Where will it stop? So we've got a very broad mandate for this session. As I was thinking about how to tap into the great expertise we have on this panel, I thought I'd break at least my part of the conversation up into 2 different segments. I thought we could have a conversation, a framing conversation about what are the actual tactics we're seeing from Beijing, how are they changing and evolving? Is it the same toolkit that we've seen for many years? Is it new challenges that are being thrown at democracies? And then the second part, the practical policy recommendations. And I know the organizers here at Forum 2000 want to make sure that we get key takeaways that can then be acted upon. And so we want to have a conversation about some of those policy recommendations for democracies and how to deal with the China challenge. So to that second point, there's going to be, I think, a question for Slido put up on the screen that the organizers put together. The question should be, what single word best describes how democracies should respond to China? And if you have the Slido app, you can go in and put in your answer to that question, and we'll try to incorporate that into the conversation later here during this session. With that, let me introduce our panelists, and I'm going to introduce them in the order they're sitting here. I'm going to kind of go to them in a different order in a minute, but immediately to my left is Shiori Yamao, who's Japan Director at the Interparliamentary Alliance on China from Japan. To her left is Amika Lucky Umeye, who's a visiting scholar actually in Taiwan right now, and also normally based in Africa, so we can talk about that perspective. To his left is Mark Lambert, who's the former China coordinator and Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Bureau of East Asian and Pacific Affairs at the U.S. Department of State, although he's now out of government service. To his left is Daiqi Lau, who's president of the Taiwan Foundation for Democracy in Taiwan. And then rounding us out on the far left is Penpa Tsering, who's president of the Central Tibetan Administration in Tibet and India. So I actually thought I'd start with you, Penpa, and kind of work our way out. Obviously, a lot of the Chinese tactics in this area start at home and start with the repression inside China, as well as their subjugation of their neighbors and those ethnic minorities that make up Chinese territory. And so why don't you start us off about what do you see from a Tibetan perspective about Chinese tactics in recent years? Are they changing? How are they evolving? And what are the lessons that you draw from that? So over to you.
Thank you. With Tibet, with East Turkestan, with Inner Mongolia, it's almost the same policy that the Chinese government is adopting since Xi Jinping came into power. The idea is if there are no nationalities, then there won't be nationality issues. So how do you do away with nationalities? So in the beginning, there were a lot of assimilationist policies that were implemented. Now China itself is facing demographic problems. That may also be one reason why there is not much demographic aggression as much as we feared. So what China is doing right now is to, of course, they can't kill all the Tibetans, or they can't kill all the East Turkestanis to make sure that the minorities are not there or the nationalities are not there. So what they do is now set up colonial-style boarding schools where about 1 million Tibetan children are in these schools starting from the age of 4. Now, when they come home, they don't speak Tibetan at all. They speak Chinese. So the whole idea is to strike at the very root of our identity. In the case of Tibetans, we have a language that is one among the 15 oldest languages in this world. And we have transliterated every available Sanskrit and Pali Buddhist text into Tibetan from 8th to 13th century. So they are striking at the Tibetan language. And the Tibetan Buddhism is also linked to Tibetan language because we are the only country that has transliterated all of Buddha's teachings. And it's available only in Tibetan language. As recent as a few years ago, one of our monks worked on a Tibetan to Tibetan dictionary, which is 223 volumes. And we presented one to the Czech National Library here and another to the Library of Congress in the United States. And that speaks for the language. So they are striking at the language, and because of that language, we have Tibetan Buddhism, and because of Tibetan Buddhism, we have our way of life. So they are striking at the very root of our identity, same as what they are doing with East Turkestan, and they have done with Inner Mongolia, or Southern Mongolia, as they like to call themselves. So, of course, on the people, these are things they are doing. When you talk about how far China will go, then you also talk about natural resources, which we had a discussion last night about the climate crisis in Tibet. So natural resources, they want to harness every natural resource in Tibet, because Tibet is huge. It's 2.5 million square kilometers, and Tibet has been unexploited, because as Buddhists, we always learn to live in harmony with nature. But I think overall, I'm sure other panelists will cover, but China's ambitions are not restricted to the region. You also have a lot of border issues with India. Only after Tibet's occupation by communist China, there is a common border between India and China now. But India still calls it Indo-Tibetan Border Police, Indo-Tibetan Border Force. That underlies India's position on Tibet also. So going beyond the region, I'm sure you have Japanese, you have Taiwanese, you have from Africa, and also from US as panelists here. But China's ambitions are global. So you're talking about Global Development Initiative, GDI. China is talking about Global Security Initiative, GSI. And China is talking about Global Civilizational Initiative. And they are expanding beyond the Global South. In the multilateral forums now, they have taken over most of the competencies that the US used to enjoy. So we have also witnessed the parade that the Chinese government organized last month, where you had Kim Jong-un, and you have Putin, and you have Iranian leaders, nexus of all evil coming together. And if they want to export their system of governance, their understanding of what human rights means to the international community. So that is where I think the international community has to be more careful about how to interact with China and how to get China involved in international multilateral forums, where they use every platform, including the Global South, in support of their positions. So I'll stop here, maybe respond to questions later.
Great. So I'll turn now to you, Daichi. What's the situation in Taiwan? Obviously, there's a lot of focus in Washington and I'm sure European capitals about the military threat to Taiwan. But what do you see at Taiwan Foundation for Democracy in terms of the evolving CCP tools to undermine Taiwanese democracy? How are they changing? How effective have they been in recent years?
Okay. Thank you for moderator's question. Before I formally answer your question, I would like to say hello to the audience. So I have seen so many friends there. Yeah, and also I like to explain a little bit. Before I formally say yes to attend, to be a speaker for this panel, I was so suspicious. What can I say? Because I think the issue is so big. Where will China stop? Cover so many domains. I'm not a China specialist. Even though I was a political scientist, I have been teaching at the university about 40 years. But this issue is so huge. But after a while, I consider myself as a Taiwanese, as you said. We are on a very hot spot, attract attention from the world, right? And also, I'm representing TFD. I'm working for the TFD, serving as at the TFD. I got to say something. So first, I consult several of my friends regarding the kind of where will China stop. Secondly, I consult ChatGPT, just like what he mentioned. Yeah, ChatGPT gives me a whole bunch of the answers. Yeah, and divide into the kind of where China stop into 4 domains. it's not a single domain. First is certainly geopolitics. We are on the so-called first chain island, right? And we are the target. And we have the same situation as Tibet. It's a kind of target area. Under Chinese thinking, we are their territory, right? So we are on the hotspot. We are considered by the world as the most dangerous place. But sorry, I have to say, Taiwanese people did not feel the same way. They are still living a kind of so-called peaceful environment so far. But that's not the issue I want to explain at the moment. So the kind of 4 domain offered by ChatGPT, I think you can check with ChatGPT too. First is a geopolitics. Second is economic reach. We know the Belt and Road Initiative. Third is domestic control. It's tight control, authoritarian regime, and also pay close attention to Tibet. Also, but they cannot reach us so far. We are kind of separate, independent entity as a political unit. Then the fourth one is military. Military kind of increasing the goal for China. According to ChatGPT, they will be the world-class military by the year 2049. But once GDP can say all these things, you can check with GPT. I don't want to repeat whatever ChatGPT said. I like to share with you my perspective as a kind of serving at TFD on behalf of Taiwan Foundation for Democracy. I will not to focus on the question, where will China stop? I will answer or consider from the perspective how we stop China, how we stop as an NGO, as a Taiwan Foundation for Democracy, will work for promoting and also protect human rights, promoting democracy. For us, I will use 4 letters, 4 English letters, to subsume my conception of how to stop China. The 4 letters is the S-T-O-P, is stop. What do I mean by S-T-O-P? So let me start with S. S means self. We should examine the health of ourselves, whether our democracy is healthy enough, whether our democracy is really involving some problems, actually quite similar to authoritarian control. You know, it's a worldwide phenomenon. Even our US friends, Larry, sitting there, complain about it's new authoritarianism. But I think we are a democratic society. We're open to all kinds of possibility. We welcome all kinds of possible innovations. We got to figure out some solution to solving the problem we are encountering. I do have some idea in my mind, but I won't tell you at the moment. I like to encourage you to imagine, to think about what kind of solution we can deal with the problem we are encountering as a democracy. We have internal problems. We have to examine ourselves. We try to cure our own problem first, self. Is S represent. T is easy to understand. Is transnational. We are doing transnational effort. Not only single democracy can counter so-called China, right? The kind of authoritarian acts, like China, Russia. Yeah, we have to work together, just like our Forum 2000. The Forum 2000 demo are wonderful examples, right? We can discuss the problem here. We can exchange ideas here. We can show our kind of enthusiasm to democracy. We try to figure out some solution to solving the problem together. We can share the experience we have. We will support the democracy in a very vulnerable situation, like Aung San Suu Kyi. We will support together. So that's what we need, transnational platform to work together. That's a T. O, what do I mean by O? I think it's very important. Objectively understanding of China. We all have our own subjectivity. And also, when I read the topic, where will China stop? I can tell, I feel a kind of certain flavor of a fear in our heart, in our mind. We are so worried about China, so progressive, so aggressively invading or expanding. But I think we have to try to keep ourselves more neutral, more objective to understand China. China internally has a lot of problems. China, you will see from different perspectives to understand not only military expansion, not only economic reach, you have to also understand China's history, China's culture. What kind of historical background he evolved or he went through. So understanding China is very important to me. Just like I like to quote from Sun Tzu. This morning, the President Jack also quoted from Sun Tzu. According to Sun Tzu, if you can know yourself, then you also know your enemy. It's easy for you to beat up your enemy. And even 100 battles, you still can win. That's according to Sun Tzu. So we have to ask ourselves, do we really objectively understand China without wearing certain lens with fear, with all kinds of colors? How we really understand China. Yeah, I think it's a very important stage. I know kind of a purely objective knowledge may not exist, but intersubjectivity, the mutual consensus is important to understand China. For example, yesterday I hear this gentleman, the professor, said, okay, Taiwan is a target. Yeah, I think most people around the world will can reach this consensus. Taiwan is a dangerous place. Even though Taiwanese didn't feel the same way, but we know we are in danger. We need to protect ourselves. We know what should we adapt, what should we develop ourselves. Okay, that's important, but we need a lot of strategies. So the objectively understanding of China, I think, is important. The last one is the most important one. P is people. China never to be a solid unit. Communist Party is never equivalent to Chinese people. Two very different. How we get access to reach people there. And also I have to quote from a Chinese idiom. This idiom says, troubles arise from within the wall. I don't know whether you understand Chinese. 祸起萧墙 means always come from inside, not from the outside. Then China always, when we feel China actually feel their own people. They fear. So they try to tightly control their people. I give you two kinds of evidence to support what my argument of China fear their own people. First is the kind of their budget for called public security, control the society. The budget for public security in China even higher than their budget for defense. Tightly control inside, set up as the first priority in their policy agenda. So they worry about their people more than outside. And also, historically speaking, Chinese experience a lot of a dynasty. If you know Chinese, it is also several thousand years. In the Chinese history, Chinese dynasty usually were overthrown by their people, not by the outside. It's their people. So there's a first one, their security, their kind of public security budget higher than defense. The second one, I want to introduce an article written by Gary King, professor from Harvard University. I believe Professor Larry Diamond also knows Gary. He wrote this article for the American Political Science Review in the year 2017. It's 2013. The title of the paper called Censorship. Censorship. How censorship in China allow governments criticism, but silence collective expression. What does he mean? He used big data, analyzed the content of millions of social media posts, originate from nearly 1,400 different social media services over whole entire China. He found the contents of posts that possibly spur social mobilization would be censored. What kind of censor they saw from the content? Usually the kind of from somewhere will post some very odd message appear in the social media and try to distract people attention from the event that was stimulating people's anger at the moment. According to Gary, and he also gave a lecture in Taiwan. He said Chinese Communist Party tried to using kind of trick to attract children's attention. Children is kind of cry, make noise, and then they say, okay, there's a candy there. Look up there. They use that kind of strategy on social media. For them, social media, people getting together, people mobilized together is the most dangerous things to China. And also, I just read a report from Freedom House. They said in the past few years, a lot of social incidents is really dangerous to Chinese society. So I think the key point for us, for TFD can do, is to reach Chinese people, either inside China or outside China. We have to maintain certain relationship or through certain access to reach people. Chinese people will be the key to stop China. So I would like to say, where China will stop? China will stop when its people force it to stop. That's what we want to do. And altogether, I don't know whether I spend too much time, but very short. Altogether, what we can do to stop China is stop. S-T-O-P. That's my suggestions.
Great. So we've got stop, and ending on that important note of that we need to keep on trying to reach Chinese people. I want to draw your attention to the word cloud from Slido. We're starting to get into a conversation about some of the proposed tactics to respond to the CCP. There's sanctions, isolation, decoupling, coordination, which was already stressed. Also, a lot of support for the notion of caution, which I guess can be interpreted in a variety of ways. So panelists can respond to those. I'm going to jump over Mark, and I warned him I was going to ask him to go last. And I'll go to Emeka. If you could talk a little bit about your perspective, both as someone who's currently based in Taiwan, but then also spends a lot of time focused on Africa. What are the tactics that you are seeing? What are the responses that you're starting to see that might work in countering the CCP's activities in Africa? I'll turn it over to you.
Well, I think, thank you so much. One of the first things that we actually have to identify is that in Africa it's a very, very complex situation because of dependency, especially economic dependency. The African people are looking for some form of economic, let me call them Chinese as saviors, you know. So they look to China as a source of, you know, infrastructural development, economic revival, and just name it. So it becomes a very, very difficult situation for African people to solve the China problem in Africa. But it's not something that we cannot do. But to do that first, the African political actors and policymakers need to understand what China is doing in Africa. That is a very big issue in Africa because there's not that awareness. Most political actors and policymakers don't even know that China is trading with Taiwan. They don't know. So if you tell, so when this because as we speak, China is it's trying to make most African countries not to have any relationship with Taiwan, in any ways. I'll give you an example. In February, the head of the Taiwan office in Nigeria addressed the Nigerian government and asked that the bilateral trade agreement between Taiwan and Nigeria should be signed, which is supposed to be a normal thing, trade agreement, And then just a week after, so a few days after, the chairman of the House of Representatives, House of Representatives in Nigeria, China Foreign Affairs Committee came out and said that no, that Nigeria is not interested in signing any trade agreement with Taiwan because we believe in one China policy. But when you look at that critically, you see that it's a statement of ignorance, because China is trading with Taiwan. So if China is trading with Taiwan, why you, an African country, what stops you from trading with Taiwan? We are not saying diplomatic recognition, but we're saying this trade is about your own betterment for your country and for your people. So if the same man who is now telling you not to trade with Taiwan is trading with Taiwan, it means there must be something good about Taiwan that man doesn't want you to see or know about. So this is very, very complex. This issue also, dovetails into economics, politics, and other aspect of engagement between the PRC and African countries. Awareness. I'll give an example. In 2015, during the FOCAC meeting in Johannesburg, Xi Jinping announced that they were going to launch a project called 10,000 satellite TV project in Africa, which is something laudable, actually, you would agree. And then it was launched, and then they went to Nigeria and African countries. And in Nigeria, they said they had completed the project in 1,000 villages. And I got a fund from Freedom House to do on-the-ground investigation of that project. So we went to the villages. You can't believe that that project had not been completed in more than 10 places or thereabouts. Now, but as of this time I was completing this field work and the report, the Star Times had already collected completion certificate from the federal government of Nigeria, meaning that they had completed 1,000 projects in Nigeria. But that was false. So we went to the Ministry of Information and said, what do you know about this? They said, no, we know nothing about it. We don't know anything about it. We're just present. We went to the Ministry of Digital Communication and how did this happen? They said, no, So it becomes a problem of people on the ground, political actors, policymakers, not even knowing what is happening. They just go corruption. They collect underhand transactions. They give them money. They just sign it and go. So I think the first issue in Africa is awareness. It's been there all over. People need to know what is happening. If you go to the media space, for instance, journalists go to China. It's one of the biggest things happening in the media space in Africa. For journalists to go to China. So every journalist wants to go to China. So they go to China, some spend 2 weeks, some spend 3 months, some spend 10 months. And it's lucrative because they get funded to come, they get paid to go and come back. And the media in Africa also has its own complications because salaries are also not there. It doesn't come as of when you would want them. And then if you go to China and someone pays you your salary for like 2 years in 3 months, and you return, you become a willing tool for propaganda in the African media space. Now, but the journalists do not understand what is happening. Because why we are concerned is that it's not as if capacity building is not good, but we are concerned that in the next 1 decade, we may have more local journalists in Africa who have been trained in China, whose mindset has been transformed to think propaganda, to do China's propaganda in Africa, than to do media that holds leadership to account. Then what kind of democracy would we have in Africa? Unfortunately, this is happening at a time when the US is pulling out of media development in Africa, so it becomes a very problematic issue. So where do we go to? The US is pulled back. The EU is not doing much. So I think this is something that we need to consider, very, very clearly and see how we can, help the African people. Not merely fund, but merely information, access to information, creating awareness, then providing that, some form of training that will help them gain resilience against PRC propaganda. I know it's very difficult to say you're going to compete with PRC in terms of economics, in terms of funding infrastructure, even though we know that those fundings lack corporate governance, because there's no information about them too. You don't see them, they're not online, they're not anywhere. I mean, it took the election of Ruto in Kenya for anybody to even get a snippet of what the details of the railway they built in in Kenya. Nobody knew what was involved. But because when Ruto was campaigning, he used it as electoral promise that he was going to release it to the public. And it was a snippet. It was a very, very lopsided agreement between Kenya and China. So it's a very difficult game, but I think it's not, we can start from somewhere. And one of the ways to start is create awareness. Let African political actors know what is happening. Let the journalists know. There are a lot of content-sharing agreements between African media organizations and even the PRC missions in Africa. It's all about propaganda. So we need to create this information for people to know what they're getting involved in. If you're signing this partnership, this is what it's going to end in. People don't know. China is telling not to trade with Taiwan, but China is trading with Taiwan. Why? So these are issues that people need to know in Africa that is not known by our political actors and policymakers. And I think if we start from somewhere, it will help Africa to get better. Thank you.
Great.
Yeah.
Shiori, I'm going to bring you in both to speak from a Japanese perspective, but then also as someone who's been involved in IPAC. Coordination is highlighted up there, and that's what IPAC's been all about between legislators. What are your thoughts, both on what China's ultimate goals are and then what tactics we should be responding with?
Well, thank you for asking me. Where will China stop? It's a so difficult question, but at least we all know that economic growth didn't stop them internally. So we need to search some other way. I think it's one thing is the coordination through like-minded countries. So let me point out two things. One is from a Japanese lens, and one is from the IPAC lens. So for thinking about China policy in Japan, I may say for a long time, discussions on China policy in Japan is a little bit polarizing topic in Japanese politics. Traditionally, China policy is considered as the right-wing issue in Japanese politics. And while many on the liberal side, left side avoided this topic, sometimes out of historical guilt or sometimes due to some kind of naive hopes that economic growth will lead China to democracy and more decent diplomatic stance. But however, I think it is around 2017, public awareness in Japan has began to change. And as we know, the report of the large-scale genocidal abuse of Uyghur people exposed the cruelty of China's government's domestic repression. And of course, then in 2019, the severe suppression of the pro-democracy activities in Hong Kong is being exposed through the YouTube video, through social medias, and I'm one of the people shocked by these YouTube videos. And at the same time, China's expansionist ambition is becoming clear and clear from the view of our Japanese populations. So as a result, a good thing is a broad, cross-party consensus has emerged that China's unjust influence, both at home and abroad, must be restrained through Japan's effort and the international coordinated efforts. So that's the good thing, and that's the trend. And maybe some people seems Japanese politics currently a little bit chaotic, unprecedented situation, but regardless of which political coalition will be made, I think it is unlikely that Japan's China policy won't move at least backward at this point. And the other lens, IPAC IPAC is International Parliamentary Alliance on China, which begins in 2020, which catalysts are, as the same implementation of national security law in Hong Kong. And it had started with 8 countries, including Japan. And we have passed 5 years. And now from 8 countries to 43 countries. And now the member of parliamentarians all through the world is 290 members we are involving in this IPAC. And yes, the more China's unjust influence is expanding, the more, this counterpart member is growing, and that's the good thing. But I have to explain what is going on toward IPAC members, especially in, small countries or countries with vulnerability in Latin America, in Africa, and in the Pacific Islands. Members are given such a severe intimidation from Chinese government. For example, some of the members were forced to withdraw from IPAC through their own governments. It is happening, but we are, against this movement from China by coordination between the 43 countries' legislators, and yes, we are helping each other toward those kind of intimidation from China. So I believe this kind of coordination from parliamentarian is effective to deter China's unjust influence, because these kind of intimidation prove that the coordination matters. So yeah, we have to maintain this kind of coordination, I think.
Great. Mark, maybe we could hear from you a little bit about what the landscape looks like in Washington. I was thinking about 5 years ago at Forum 2000, if we were having this conversation or in other transatlantic venues, Washington was driving the conversation on China. And even this would have been during the first Trump term, there was a clear sense about where the Trump administration was going, where the US policy was headed, both in Congress and in the executive. I personally don't see that right now, but maybe I'm missing something. But interested to hear your thoughts and maybe just describe for all of our foreign colleagues what the debate in Washington currently looks like.
Sure, and please bear with me. I recognize we have a lot of political scientists in the audience. So let me start with the political science behind this and what we were trying to do. And you're exactly right. This began at the tail end of the first Trump administration. We had identified at that time China was making strong efforts in international organizations and bodies to change the way they were running, to change definitions, to use terms like win-win, which to a native English speaker means if you and I have a bargain, I want you to get something, you'll get something. In Chinese parlance, that was, no, win-win is if you're China and I'm not China, we disagree, we will talk about the things we agree upon, like a trade deal, but we're not going to raise human rights. We're not going to talk about Xinjiang. We're not going to talk about Tibet. Raising awareness of what was going on and pushing back what the Chinese were trying to do to dominate international organizations. That continued under the Biden administration. And again, back to poli-sci, you started with defining what your strategy was. So very early on, there was a concerted effort to identify an Indo-Pacific strategy into which a China strategy sat. And I think it's important to look at it that way because the Indo-Pacific is so important to the United States. And it was decided that despite problems with Russia, with Iran, with Venezuela and others, there's one country on earth that is determined to fundamentally change the international order that was created after World War II, and that has the diplomatic, the economic, the military capabilities of perhaps doing so unless you push back. And so it was decided that this required a different way of doing business. We needed to break down those stovepipes that said our economists only work on the economic relationship, our trade people only work on the trade relationship, our security people only work on the security relationship, our human rights people only work on the human rights challenges, and look at this far more comprehensively. So we developed our own Indo-Pacific strategy. It was unclassified. We sent it around the world. And then we worked with our partners and allies closely. If you recall, shortly thereafter, Japan had its own. The Republic of Korea had its own. The EU had its own. Australia had its own, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All showing what is our playbook, what is our game plan, what are we trying to do, and identifying what the challenges were. And in no particular order, those challenges were this. And this was the first challenge, was this new relationship between Moscow and Beijing, into which Beijing was the big brother. Moscow's the little brother. Beijing is the economic force dealing with an economic dwarf with a real military that wants to invade another country. And our analysis was, but for that economic support from China, the Russian invasion of Ukraine would not succeed. And trying to raise awareness, and this is where we lashed up with our European partners and allies in making awareness of this relationship between Putin and Xi Jinping. Next was, while most of China's objectives were very different than the Soviet Union, that they weren't primarily territorial, there were some territorial objectives. Those were maritime and land. Maritime, it was they wanted to turn the South China Sea into a lake that China controlled. They wanted to control the East China Sea, which borders Japan, and the Yellow Sea, which borders Korea, and make those Chinese lakes. And the territorial aim was Taiwan. And so part of our strategy had to have a strong Taiwan strategy, raising awareness not just in the United States, but globally. Why does Taiwan matter? So with American audience, we were saying, do you realize Taiwan is the United States' 8th largest trading partner? And you may recall a report that came out from the Rhodium Group that talked about what would happen if Taiwan blockaded, or if China blockaded Taiwan. Not attacked, blockaded. It would be trillions of dollars of damage to the global economy. And it came as a surprise to many Europeans when they found out which European countries would be affected by this. So raising awareness. The next challenge was technology. We're living in an incredibly changing world. And the emerging technologies that the Chinese have been very transparent about, they want to lead in the world, are artificial intelligence, quantum computing, next generation semiconductors, and biotechnology. All of which can be weaponized. All of which can be turned into the next generation of weapons that can be used to kill Americans or kill our allies. And we made it very clear, you may recall the unfortunate term, small yard, high fence, of while we have a huge trade relationship with China, we are not going to help China become leaders in those emerging technologies that can be used to kill us. And that required coordination and industrial policy, the likes of what the United States had not done since World War II. And then finally was traditional trade. Most trade that the United States did with China, I would argue most trade that Europe does with China, is benign. But in addition to those technologies that we had to be very careful about, we also had other trade war challenges. For instance, China subsidized hundreds of electric vehicle manufacturers and now makes very high quality electric vehicles that could be used without protections to kill Japan's auto industry, Korea's auto industry, the European auto industry, and the North American auto industry, devastating how many jobs around the world. And then finally, looking at the internal situation and the plight of the people who live in China. So raising awareness that if you are a company and you think you can buy cotton from Xinjiang, you better make sure it's not been made with slave labor, because chances are it has been. Or if you're a European and you are processing tomatoes that have been grown in Xinjiang, you better make sure they've not been picked by forced labor, because then you will never be able to sell 1 can of tomatoes in the United States. Similarly, concerns about Tibet, always a key issue, but with His Holiness's aging and health situation, aware that the Chinese have a plan for secession, and trying to raise an understanding of what that means to the stability, not just in Tibet, but in Mongolia, in Central Asia, in parts of Russia. These are all key. Looking at Hong Kong and looking at the way the Chinese are using goons from their security services, not just within China, to go after people who want Uyghurs and Tibetans and Hong Kongers to have more freedom, but they're doing it in all of our countries. I saw it in San Francisco on the margins of APEC. I have European friends who've seen it in Germany, in Switzerland, and elsewhere. This is going on around the world, and we need to shine a spotlight on it. And then finally, working in places in Africa, in Latin America, in the Middle East, and others, of trying to find an alternative to development assistance and to strategic minerals, to food security and other things that will be attractive to the people who live there. And so that required us working with USAID and JICA and COICA and the Europeans. It required us to work with experts on countering disinformation to push back. Now, it wasn't a perfect strategy, but it was a damn good one. And we had experts, honest to God China experts in every corner of the globe who could serve as circuit riders and train people in our embassies, talk to our friendly partners, talk to others about, hey, what are you seeing in Africa? What are you seeing in Latin America? What are you seeing in Central Asia? And are there things we ought to be concerned about? Now let's contrast that with where we are today. And I would agree, I'm not seeing this type of coordination. And I don't think we will. Washington does not have a China strategy. If you asked anyone in Washington, what is our China strategy, you will get a number of answers. The national defense strategy will be rolled out at some time soon. That will be a tell. Now, some people say it means that the United States is going to pull out of Europe and focus on China. Others are saying, no, the United States is going to pull out of both Europe and Asia and focus on the Americas. It will not deal with development assistance. It will not deal with countering disinformation because prior to even setting out a strategy, we destroyed the U.S. Agency for International Development and our ability to counter disinformation. So everyone knows in the United States, including a lot of Republicans, this is a global challenge that the United States faces to push back at what the Chinese are doing. But even before we have a strategy, we got rid of some of our best tools, including firing 10% of our diplomats, many of whom are fluent Chinese speakers. If the Pentagon's response to this strategy was to fire 10% of employees at the Pentagon and get rid of all of our aircraft carriers, everyone would say we're insane. But we've done that with development assistance and with diplomacy. So it's not a great picture in Washington right now. But I am an optimist and I see ways to move forward. And I'm take heart from the previous panel we had where people were talking about the future of European-US relations. I would add our Asian allies and partners and the United States. We're in the backseat in many ways. You're not going to see the type of leadership you got used to from the United States, I predict, I fear. But we're all in this together. And the way we stop China is by banding together. They will stop where we tell them to stop. They will stop where we are working together in Africa, in Latin America, in Asia, and in Europe to stand up for those things that our grandparents fought up for, and that those people in this city pushed back when they defeated Nazism and communism in this place. That's the way we win it.
With that sobering analysis from Mark, I'll turn it back to Penpa and Dachi. Interested to hear your practical recommendations that we haven't already addressed, or if you want to comment on some of the ideas raised by other panelists about how to push back, what you've seen working first from Penpa in the Tibetan case. What actions do you want to see with the understanding that the US may be moving in a different direction right now?
I echo the thinkings that were expressed by other panelists in creating more awareness on China's motivation around the world. And I think that the question is, how is China able to do all this? It's the money, right? So I think the basic question is, how do we address this? Do you give more business to China and then enable China to do all these things that you complain about? You know, I have some European friends who ask me, who tell me, oh, the dragon is biting at us. Then I tell them, dragon at one time was very weak. It was not in a position to bite anybody. No, it's the United States, it's the European nations, it's Japan, it's Taiwan. All your investment in China made today what China is. And now they are biting at you. But knowing that China is biting at you, the dragon is biting at you, if you still keep feeding the dragon, then whose fault is it? So we should not be enabling China to do all the things, creating all the dead economies in Africa, Latin America, in Southeast Asia, and then taking over land, like Sihanouk Whale in Cambodia, you have the Coco Islands in Burma, you have Hambantota Port in Sri Lanka, Gwadar Port in Pakistan, then you Djibouti, up to Africa. So China has covered so much in maritime Silk Road also. So I think it's very important to understand, because with European nations, 27 European nations, if you look at the 2024 numbers, Europe exported only 200 billion to China and imported 600 billion. So you have a trade deficit of 400 billion every single year. United States have more than 300 billion trade deficit with China. And even India, despite all the border issues and all that, the trade is increasing. So if we give more trade, more business to China, then China has all the reserves. This year, particularly, I'm sure it will cross $1 trillion of foreign exchange reserve. So when they have all this money, then they spend it on space technology, they spend it on robotics, they spend it on chips, quantum computing, dual-use technology, creating all these dead economies around the world. So I echo what Emeka said. Even in Latin America, I traveled to several countries. This time also I'm planning to travel, but there's too much pressure from the Chinese government. The Mexico, last time I was there, the former foreign minister of Mexico's nickname was China Boy. So there is no real understanding of what China is doing around the world. That is why awareness is very, very important in Africa and Latin America. Southeast Asian countries know exactly what's happening, but they are not able to do much because of their economic dependence on China. And now I hear that imports from China is increasing in many countries, including Europe. The last time I was in Germany in June, they said in 2 months, imports from China has increased by 20%. And the same thing is happening in all the Southeast Asian countries. If you remember, soon after President Trump imposed his tariff, Xi Jinping went to Laos, he went to Cambodia, and also Vietnam and Malaysia. So that was to build a force against the United States, but they themselves were in trouble with the United States on tariff. But the other purpose was to make sure that these countries don't raise tariffs, because China produces 30% of world's manufactured goods, and 37% of that goes to the United States. And so far, they've been up and down. From 145, it's down to 30%. So even now, it's going on. The trade war is going on. So let's see how things shape up in the next coming plenum in a few days from now, and how all this US-China tariff and how European and other countries also respond to growing China. And you are all responsible for making China what it is today. So I think we need to learn that lesson and then make sure that we don't make China more powerful than what it is already today.
Dachi, do you want to respond to any of the proposals that have been made, or if you have other ideas about how democracies should be countering this challenge?
Okay. First, I agree with Mark's point of view. We should form a kind of alliance to work together to defend China's invasion. That's an important thing that I also mentioned about transnational cooperation. The first things I like to echo back to you. But I think the kind of second point is about a democracy, how democracy can be a force, can be influential in either in, we have to examine ourselves or influence China. Our TFD already have been doing something. We support a kind of a dissent outside China to support them to do some activities. Because of our way of doing this, we now TFD on the black name list. People like me, like our TFD colleagues, we are not allowed to enter China. That's a kind of a risk we take, but fine. But I think we are, because we are Taiwan, but if your organization can do something to reach the Chinese people, exile outside, can help these people. They have some connection with inside China, can do something. They have a lot of internal issues. they wait for some kind of support from outside. I know some detailed cases, but if we just feel China is an entire entity, only from a very top-down kind of a level to formulate that strategy, that's a nation state to state. It's not a people to people. I still want to focus on people. People there can be influenced, can be, if they still looking for something, looking for freedom, for example. So if we try to access that channels, I know some specific case, but right now I don't want to speak it out. And also, TFD also doing something, like for example, awareness, like you said, recent awareness about kind of Communist China's problem. We annually publish so-called China Human Rights Report. And we collect all kind of detailed information about how China violates human rights. We publish that, we have a expert team to do the research, and we spread that kind of report for kind of organize. If you require this copy, we can send to you. Yeah, that's another way to aware the kind of to raise awareness about China's problem. But I still think Taiwan, even in the most dangerous position, I still think we should find some other way to deal with China, not only direct confrontation. And also, I think if international environment can give Taiwan more support, it's a kind of an odd situation. On the one hand, you know Taiwan's important. Taiwan provide a kind of chips, over 90% of the market, especially the high level of chips, right? But on the other hand, you see the international organization, international kind of alliances do not accept Taiwan well. Why? Why such a kind of a weird situation? For Taiwan, we have forced to be controlled by kind of what China said. If you give us more room, certainly it's a several way, because China always say, one China policy, if you do that, blah, 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 a lot of kind of punishment coming. But just like this gentleman said, the president of Tibet, if you want to do business with China, so difficult to negotiate any political benefit, to me. But can you really give up a business benefit to exchange for political benefit? We don't know. I'm asking all the people here, our audience here. Taiwan is dangerous. Taiwan is important, but how the world treat Taiwan? We want to do democracy. We want to promote democracy. We treasure democracy. According to our TFD survey, more than 80% of people, even our democracy, really encounter a lot of problems. But if we have choice, we still choose democracy. That's kind of a belief in democracy. We already buried the seed in our people. We already assume democracy as our DNA. So it's a strong force to defend China. But we need outside support. It's not alone. It's not only the kind of a military kind of a weapon things, like U.S. want us to increase our defense budget to the 5%, even 10%, according to your president. I think that's push Taiwan away. It's not a way to get Taiwan closer. That's my own opinion, not representing our TFD. Sorry.
So we've got just under 20 minutes left in the panel. I do want to bring in members of the audience here shortly. We got a lot of China expertise, as has been noted, in the audience. So we'll get to the audience in a minute. So start thinking of your interventions. Emeka, just given what Mark described about the situation in Washington, you already noted the decline of U.S. resources. Just any thoughts from you about who might help fill that void? Is it the Europeans? Is it maybe Japan or other partners that will help, especially in places like Africa, step in and help counter just some of those structural issues that the Chinese are exploiting?
Thank you so much for your question. I think it's a complicated situation, because one of the questions I would like to ask is, who is available, realistically, to help Africa? Is it the U.S. has already pulled back? Maybe we look to the European Union, Japan, some form of coalition. Maybe we'll call it a coalition of, I don't know, these are not major coalitions, we'll call it a coalition of maybe European Union, Japan, Africa, India, that could help, because the US is no longer there. So maybe that could help. But you see, because China is, the Africans want to see, what are you giving us, you know? Even if it's underground, even if it's not in something that does not last, they want to see the roads. Are you constructing the roads, you know? They want to see this, they want to see the big building. And then, so most of these other countries find it difficult to do some of these things too. Even though we agree that the US has done well with the Lobito corridor. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, something to applaud, you know. But all the same, it's not, the Chinese are doing more, they're doing more here and there. So I think that coalition will be fine. You know, we'll call it the coalition of these countries. And with Africa, I think that would be something to cheer about, yeah. So I think.
Shiori, has IPAC started to talk at all about how to deal with this new reality coming from the US? Obviously, I'm sure you still have engaged members of the US Congress, who, from my perspective at least, do have a China strategy. There is actually a bipartisan congressional China strategy in Washington. But just talk us through how IPAC might also be evolving in the years to come.
Yeah. So now we began to discuss about how we fulfill the vacuum which was made by the, United States shifting role in that kind of, support, development assistance. And I think we, IPAC is planning to conduct the global meeting in this November. And I think the U.S. members will come together to, discuss these matters. And that will be the very important issues for us to discuss. And for the Japanese perspective, I think now with the United States turned inward, Japan faces some kind of a historic crossroads, should we say, because America is stepping back so that Japan must lead, or should we also say if America goes America first, then why should not Japan go Japan first? So it's the very, historic crossroads. But yeah, this is the real test for us. But I believe that Japan should choose and can choose to become the reliable partner that holds the international order together when others turn away. So Japan may not be, leading superpower, but we can be a steady power which offer, credible alternatives that respect transparency or sustainability or, local ownership. This has been the, character from the, Japanese assistance, and there will going to be. So we, Japan, will make effort to, coordinate effectively among other players in development or investment and institution building as, we ever do. But I just want to point out that in Japan, to be honest, Japan first sentiment is developing as we see in the latest upper house elections. The new party stimulating that kind of, our nation first sentiment is, getting, growing up and up and up. So what we have to do is stably persuade our own populations that international based order matters because if the, rule of law were taken over by the rule of power, maybe a few, only a few big countries can survive, but most of our countries, including, of course, Japan, where the world can ruled by power. I'll say to the Japanese voters that we would not ever reach to the photo games. So we should. That is very important. How we persuade our populations that international order matters to our national interests. That's what I think.
Great. And Mark, one final turn to you before we open it up. This new normal you described, do you think this is permanent? Or how optimistic are you that actually the U.S. system might revert to where it was?
I do not think it's permanent. When we were designing the strategy, we talked with our colleagues in Congress quite a bit, Republicans and Democrats. There's huge amounts of support among traditional Republicans in the United States. And if I fancy myself a student of American history, we have gone through periods in the past where we've been isolationist. We've gone through periods of the past where we were worried about the other. We attacked the outsider, our Red Scares and those things, and we've gotten through them. What I think we need is a reminder from our partners here in Europe, in Africa, in Latin America, in Asia, of what our best selves are. It's a combination of enlightened self-interest and just doing what's right. We are in the middle of an integrity test right now, and we have to be able to pass that test. The stakes are just so high.
Great. So I want to bring in, we have about 10 minutes, so bring in a couple members of the audience with comments or questions. If you could keep them brief, and then when I call on you, state your name and affiliation. And if you're targeting a certain member of the panel with your question, please make that clear as well. So gentleman here in the first row.
My name is Shikata, a company fellow of Mitsubishi Company. Let me ask one question to Mr. Lambert and one question to President Liao. U.S. Congress once determined there's a kind of strong anti-China policy. But President Trump keeps saying that he has a good relationship with President Xi Jinping. So once a Taiwan contingency breaks out, I doubt if USA takes some concrete actions. So how do you see such USA's reaction in case of that contingency? That's that question to Mr. Lambert. As to President Liao, ordinary Taiwanese people's reaction. Generally speaking, overseas Chinese, particularly business persons, have different nationalities and they diversify their resources in many countries. Once contingency breaks out, I'm afraid Taiwanese business persons may leave Taiwan for other countries like Canada, Australia, and so on. So what would be the reaction of ordinary Taiwanese in case of Taiwan contingency? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, let's collect all of them, and then I'm going to give the speakers just a couple of minutes to respond at the end. There's someone in the second row.
Hello, my name is Cameron Warner. I'm from Aarhus University in Denmark, and I had a question for you, Mark, but also possibly for you a bit, Jamie. You spoke a lot about the U.S.'s strategy with China, and I was wondering if you could speak about U.S.'s strategy with India. Is there one from the executive branch in particular, or also is there a separate one from the legislative branch? Why does it seem like at a time when the U.S. could really use an ally in Asia, it seems as if the Trump administration is pushing India into Russia's and China's arms? Thank you.
Great, and I think, unless my eyes are deceiving me, there's two questions in the last row here in the middle. So maybe on the end first, and then by the camera.
I have a question to the President Liao. I'm a student from China. I study in Charles University now. So I want to ask, how do you think Chinese people can stop the Chinese government? Because, you know, the Chinese people, they failed in 1989 and they failed in 2022, the white paper revolutions. So how can they stop Chinese government? If Chinese government, they maybe just depress them, and maybe the military will also come to the street like this. And do you think? And another question is, do you think the Chinese people has how to say? Most of Chinese people really want to have the democracy in China, because I think the Chinese government, the policy can satisfy the most middle class people. So the middle class and the upper class in China, they are satisfied to the government, but the lower class, they don't have any power, and they even cannot go to the street. They even cannot go to, how to say, quit job for one day and go to the street for protest. Otherwise, they will lose their job or they will lose their life. So do you think, are there really many Chinese people will come to the street to go to some protest, or are they really want to stand up to stop Chinese government? Thank you.
Very briefly, one final question by the camera.
Yeah, hello. My question is why we don't learn from China. So why don't we adapt like state capitalism like China is doing? Because it's obviously more efficient than our capitalism. Thank you.
Oh my God.
So we've got 5 minutes, a little bit under 5 minutes, and you all don't need to feel that you need to respond, but those who want, we've got a wide range of questions about the power dynamics within China, the tactics, the merits of Chinese capitalism, the supposed merits of Chinese capitalism, and some questions about Trump's approach both on India and then in the more extreme scenarios on Taiwan. Maybe, Mark, I'll start with you. Very briefly, 1 minute or less.
I'll get to them quickly. I am confident the United States will honor its treaty obligations, but I remind you, our treaty obligations are with Japan, Korea, Australia, the Philippines, Thailand, NATO, and the Rio Pact. We have no formal treaty obligations towards anyone else, but we do have interests. For India, we will never be an ally, in my humble opinion, with India. Our differences are just too much, but I think we can have an ever closer relationship. And nothing so enhances a close relationship as a common challenge. The Indians are concerned about China. Modi's visit to Beijing aside, that was a brief interlude, in my opinion. Most Indians I talk to are really deeply concerned about China. I got to do this. Why don't we all do state capitalism? Have you been to China? 400 million people have a junior high school education and are working for $10 a day. Chinese are voting with their feet, and it's not just poor Chinese. It's well-educated, middle-income Chinese who can't get decent jobs in China. And they're going to the United States, they're going to Europe, often illegally, because there is no hope in their country right now. I don't think that's a model for success. How do we stop the PRC? Or how do we help people within the PRC push back at what's going on? That's up to the citizens of China. But I do think we as outsiders have a responsibility to courageous people in China, ethnic minorities, religious adherents, Han Chinese who are just fed up with what they've got, to give them hope and to show them that it doesn't have to be that way. And Xi Jinping is not going to live forever. I think we need to always signal, look, we are standing up to you right now, but if you change your policies, we can back down too. I think that's important.
Dachi, do you want to respond to the question that was directed to you?
Okay, the two questions to me, right? The first one is from this gentleman. I think what you said is a hypothetical conditions. Usually, for our Taiwanese politicians will say, hypothetical condition, I don't want to answer. But I can say, but I think we prepare some scenario, but also we trust our friends in Washington, D.C. Especially, we try to make friends within the group in MEGA. I hope so. That's a government affair. I'm from the NGO. Okay, that's my first answer to you. There's another gentleman from behind talking about how we can trust Chinese people or they have opportunity to overthrow the communist regime. I have to tell you, I don't know. But I tell you two stories. First story is from my colleague from the marine science. He said that kind of, according to their experience, the highest, the most advanced technology, see from the telecast from the space to look at the ocean, only can see through 50 meters. But everything, the ocean change from the bottom, below the 50 meter. So on the surface, you didn't see anything. You didn't see the change. After a long while, the buttons come up, then the whole sea phenomenon changed. So what you cannot see influences what you can see. Something in the button, okay? That's the first scientific story. Second story is from a friend of mine, long time ago, before the current government stopped kind of a frequent exchange or tourist between the two countries. But quite a few years ago, maybe 8 years, 10 years ago, one of my friend from the mainland to visit Taiwan. He was a Communist Party comrade. He served in the custom. Then he came to Taiwan. He got a tour, 7 days, travel around the whole Taiwan island, 7 days. He said what impressed him most in Taiwan is not about kind of a high building. Mainland China got a lot of high buildings, modern architecture, nothing about this. It's over the 7 days, the bus driver, only pushed the horn 3 times. 3 times altogether. Then he said that's far, the mainland China in that regard, far behind Taiwan. He envied Taiwan. That's soft power. We don't know what kind of soft power will make effect, but we make effort every moment. That's my answer to you.
That's a perfect note to end on. I think please join me in thanking our panelists.
It was an honor. Thank you so much. No, it was an honor.